Good evening. It's finally cool enough I can sit out here on my back deck and not run the risk of heat stroke. I'm sure you can still hear the air conditioner going, and I know you can see the ceiling fan out here going in the background, but I want to give y'all a rundown of our lesson that I brought this morning at Goldana Baptist Church. If it were to have a theme, it would be don't underestimate the impactfulness of your faithfulness and what it will have on future generations. You see, inside the Ten Commandments, we find a beautiful lesson. It's Exodus 24 and 5. It says, "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of their parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands." Now, y'all, that is an impressive promise made by an impressive God inside a code, a set of laws that we still hold dear today. But I'm afraid what we sometimes miss about this is that it's 100% up to us. You see, we must press on, we must persevere, we must endure hardships that Christ promised us from his own lips in John 16:33. In this world you will have trouble. Not may, not might, could happen. You will. It's gonna happen. But then he tells us, but take heart, but keep your head up. Be strong, because I have overcome this world. Now, if we want an example of perseverance and staying the course, other than Christ himself, I believe we must look at the Apostle Paul and look at his life in its entirety. You see, he gave up a comfortable life of peace and respect of others and just a life in the lap of luxury in the finest institutions that Jerusalem had to offer in order to be a homeless, hunted, sometimes even imprisoned drifter. And he writes about perseverance frequently, and if anyone demonstrated endurance, it was him. He gives us almost like a resume of what he went through in 2 Corinthians 11:23 and 28. We'll go over those in just a moment. But he goes into great detail about the hardship that he has experienced for Christ. And as we read his words, we see that he's not embarrassed of this. He wears these events, these sufferings, and their ensuing scars, both physical and mental, as badges of honor. He's very proud of what Christ has asked him to do and what he has been through for Christ. He wants people to know what following Christ looks like for him. Now, during this time, he was speaking to false brothers that were trying to run him down, trying to negate his influence on the church and say that he was nothing special, that he was a fraud, and he is putting an end to that. So 2 Corinthians 11, beginning in verse 23. Now keep in mind, a lot of times that Paul's letters, they were signed by him at the bottom of the page, but more times than not, they were dictated to a scribe, and a scribe would write them down. And as we first read this, beginning here in verse 23, in my meager opinion, I think we're seeing a scribe putting his own emphasis on something here, because he's watching as Paul is pacing back and forth and punching the air and getting louder and louder. And you'll see it right there within verse 23 when he says, "Are they servants of Christ? I am a better one. I am talking like a madman." That may have been from the scribe. You know, he wanted people to know, this dude is, he's serious. He is I ain't never seen him act this way before. And then he goes on to say, "With far greater labors, far more imprisonments, countless beatings, and often near death." Then he gets very specific about his sufferings. "5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at open sea." on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, dangers from my own people, dangers from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. And apart from the other things, there is the daily pressure of me, or on me, of my anxiety for all the churches. Through all the trials, he urged believers not to tire in following Christ, even when he himself was persecuted. He'd been beaten, stoned, whipped, driven out of town, shipwrecked, reviled, and abandoned, and despite having 1,000 reasons to be disheartened, he knew his obedience to God was not in vain. In fact, he tells us that he knew that they were well worth it in Romans 8:18. I consider that our present sufferings, they're not even worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Now, I also don't want us to let this encyclopedia of sufferings overshadow the final verse in this particular passage. And apart from other things, there is the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for the churches. His greatest pain, his greatest trial, his greatest heartache was for the churches that he either founded or he communicated with. He was most concerned not with himself, but with those that he had inspired, his children, and their walk with the Lord. Y'all, the Apostle Paul's greatest concern was us. Right here today, it's us. Now consider the awesome harvest that has resulted from this apostle's faithfulness. The gospel spread across the known world at the time, the Roman Empire. The early church grew far beyond its Jewish origin there. And what's more, the seeds that Paul planted by writing this epistle, or all of his epistles, have resulted in literally billions of lives being transformed. In other words, there are billions of souls in heaven right now because of Paul's words that never met him on earth, didn't even live at the same time as him on earth. And to think that any strength, any insight that we draw from these letters, every time that God uses the pen of Paul to speak to us about a very particular event, a time, a question, a hardship in our lives, it is the fruit of the hardships that he endured. And I believe that every now and then we need to be reminded of our importance in the kingdom of God. Do you realize, or do you need to be reminded how impactful your life is? Don't be deceived by Satan's lie that your suffering and that your obedience will amount to nothing, or that God simply doesn't notice, or that you've been overlooked in the Almighty's plan. Your faithfulness to God never goes to waste, ever. And it is never an exercise in futility. During his time here on earth, Paul didn't know the extent of the fruit that God would produce through his steadfast, unshakable obedience. Neither can you gauge how the Lord's planning on using you. So don't lose heart. Don't ever compare your walk to anybody else, your sufferings or your effectiveness against others. Keep your focus on eternal things, on the things that really matter, and not on the hardships of this little bit of a mist that we call life. Some folks speculate that Paul even wrote the book of Hebrews. Now, we don't know that for a fact, but whoever did write it encourages us in chapter 10, verses 35 and 36. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. So you need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. Don't throw it away. Don't give up. Don't quit. Perseverance is an odd word because this verse does a wonderful job of telling us what it is by telling us what it's not. It's when we don't quit. It's when we don't give up. It's when we don't throw in the towel. Charles Spurgeon was once quoted as saying, "It is only serving God that is doing the immortal work. It is only living for Christ that is living at all." Which, as I wrap this up, leads me to ask a question. If you're watching this, let me ask you, are you really living? I mean, really? Are you living? Do you have a story that is being written to inspire and to bless the generations that will follow you? Is your life at this moment one that honors God to the point that He would, as it says in Exodus, show love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments? To put it another way, maybe slightly more blunt, kind of communicate better that way. Let me just ask you, do you know Christ? Do you know Him? A decision must be made. Even not making a decision is still making a decision. You see, you're going to have suffering, frustration, heartbreak, death here on this earth. The question is, will it be for His glory, or will it be a foretaste of what is to come forever? Death and damnation in a hell that was never created for you. You see, to the believer, this earth is as close as they'll ever get to hell. To the unbeliever, this earth is as close as they'll ever get to heaven. Suffering is inevitable. Don't let it be in vain. Let your sufferings bring you to the true life that He desires for you, because He went to the cross to make it possible. And I'll close by asking you to please don't let that beautiful death be in vain either. Thanks for watching. I love y'all. See you soon. Bye-bye.